The night shimmered with excess, gold light folding over crystal glasses, laughter echoing off marble, and the air perfumed with pretense. She stood amid it all, wrapped in the quiet armor of grace, her heartbeat keeping tempo with the orchestra's string section. He moved through the crowd like a man who owned it, his voice sharp and charming, slicing through conversation until it reached her. The toast began as admiration, turned jest, then humiliation. A single sentence, light as champagne foam, but heavy enough to silence the room. Every gaze turned toward her. For a moment she wanted the ground to open, to swallow her whole, but she did not move. The music stumbled, then caught itself again, softer this time, as if the violins themselves pitied her. What no one saw, not yet, was the quiet certainty beneath her stillness, the secret already set in motion before the night began. The laughter resumed, brittle, forced, like glass clinking over old wounds. She drifted toward the balcony, needing air, her heels soft against the marble. Behind her, gossip hatched in whispers. The charity's darling undone by a careless remark, they said. But the city skyline beyond the ballroom glowed like a mirror to her resolve. Every tower, every window seemed to pulse with possibility. She had already written her name where it mattered most, inked her truth beneath the very cause that tonight pretended to celebrate him. The gala's rhythm went on, unaware of the trap its host had built with his own arrogance. When the music swelled again, it carried the promise of revelation. The MC's voice boomed over the crowd, announcing the presentation of the evening's highest donors. Laughter returned, perfumed and shallow, as he beckoned the man to the stage. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, his grin smooth, his eyes sliding toward her. An unspoken victory. But when the screen behind him flickered to life, a hush fell so absolute it swallowed even the music. The donor list appeared, a cascade of names, each more dazzling than the last, until it stopped at one. Her signature. Elegant, deliberate, written in the gold script of truth. The silence broke not with words, but with a single clap, then another. The applause grew, soft at first, uncertain, then thunderous, echoing off marble and chandelier. Cameras flashed. The man's face drained of color beneath the white-hot lights. She didn't move, didn't bow, didn't smile. Her power was in stillness, in the quiet dignity of being seen for what she had always been. Every rumor, every whisper, dissolved under the truth written in gold across that screen. The orchestra returned to life, swelling with triumph. The night had turned, not in rage, but in revelation. When it ended, she slipped out before the champagne toasts resumed. The city's cool night wrapped around her like absolution. Behind her, the gala's laughter stumbled into forced cheer, the orchestra fading into a memory of strings. Her reflection followed her in every passing window, calm, resolute, alive again. In her silence, she had spoken louder than his cruelty ever could. Somewhere above, the sky pulsed faintly with the same gold as her signature. The quiet proof that dignity, once reclaimed, glows long after the spotlight fades. The city morning was sharp and still, a cold contrast to the glittering warmth of the gala. She sat by the window, the sunlight slicing through sheer curtains like a question. Social media buzzed with fragmented impressions. Headlines danced between admiration and thinly veiled envy. She traced the words with her fingers, absorbing the subtle satisfaction of being recognized, yet untouched by the spectacle. Her years had taught her patience, the art of quiet victories. Outside, life continued in oblivion to the small, seismic shift she had created the night before. Her reflections stared back, steady and unflinching, as if confirming the truth she already knew. Dignity never needed an audience. He moved through the city differently now, the remnants of his humiliation tugging at the edges of his carefully curated image. He was seasoned in charm, yet suddenly vulnerable beneath the scrutiny of a society that had witnessed his misstep. Friends and rivals whispered, their laughter softer, tinged with pity or envy. Each passing glance reminded him that power was fleeting when wielded without empathy. He called for meetings, planning appearances, smoothing his image like a fraying silk scarf. But even in the polished reflection of glass towers, he could not erase the moment she had outshone him. She met a longtime friend at a quiet cafe, sharing a table by the window. She carried herself with an effortless authority that even her closest confidants noticed. They spoke not of scandal, but of balance, of quiet power. Every sip of coffee grounded her in reality, in the choices she could make, the influence she could wield without spectacle. Outside, the city moved fast and unseeing, but inside that cafe, the conversation carved a map of possibilities, hinting at the strategies she might employ when society's gaze returned to the ballroom. Memories of the gala lingered like a shadow on her apartment walls. The laughter, the momentary sting, the sudden triumph, all intertwined. She traced the sequence in her mind, weighing it with care. She understood that life did not reward impulsive anger, but measured action. In the quiet, she plotted not revenge in its raw form, but the subtle demonstration of her competence, her influence, and her capacity to effect change where it truly mattered. The city outside seemed oblivious, yet every reflection in the glass carried a promise. Patience would turn perception into power. Evening fell with a hush, the city's pulse dimming into soft amber glows. She walked along the riverside, letting the water reflect the city lights like scattered memories. Her stride was calm, controlled, each step deliberate. The night reminded her of the duality of appearances, how easily the world could be misled by charm and spectacle, and how power often came silently, through precision and patience. Behind every skyscraper, every gala, there lay a network of influence she could navigate with careful poise. Tonight she had no audience, only the reflection of the river and the knowledge that her next move would be her own. The city's skyline gleamed like fractured glass, each window a reflection of ambition and desire. She stood on her apartment balcony, watching the day unfold, aware that her mind now moved faster than her pulse. The gala had been a test, a crucible that revealed both the fragility of appearances and the depth of her own composure. In mirrors and window panes, she rehearsed her posture, her smile, her silence, all instruments in a symphony of subtle influence. Every reflection reminded her, control was a quiet art, a power wielded in patience, not spectacle. She was no longer merely reacting. She was planning the rhythm of her ascent, one deliberate note at a time. In a softly lit library tucked behind velvet drapes, she met with an influential confidant, a philanthropist in her early 50s whose calm authority had shaped many successful campaigns. They spoke in hushed tones, exchanging knowledge and strategy as if the words themselves could manipulate time. Here, the remnants of humiliation dissolved into opportunity, and her careful mind began to weave networks of influence that would ripple far beyond the gala. Each alliance was measured, intentional, a step toward reclaiming not just social power, but respect earned in silence. Her office at 32 became a map of subtle power. Documents, donor lists, and calendars formed constellations of influence. Each contact, each meeting, each gesture was plotted with precision. He at 35 remained unaware of the momentum gathering beneath the surface, whispers of reputation that could shift tides silently. She worked through the evening, tracing connections, noting vulnerabilities. Her gaze fell on a framed photograph of the gala, the golden light frozen, her signature sharp and deliberate. That single stroke was now the blueprint for strategy, a reminder that the world responded not to emotion, but to proof. Cafes, social events, and boardroom corridors became her observatories. She moved among her peers with deliberate ease, noting gestures, overhearing half-whispered remarks, interpreting glances. Every interaction was data, every smile or frown a piece of the puzzle. Meanwhile, he at 35 flitted through the city, unaware that each misstep, each careless word, was quietly catalogued. Patience was her weapon, observation her shield. Through restraint, she cultivated a knowledge others could not anticipate, one that would let her shape outcomes without overt confrontation. As night fell, the city lights mirrored the constellations above, reminding her that strategy was both patient and infinite. She walked along quiet streets, letting the cool air steady her mind. Each step reaffirmed a new sense of power. Not the flash of the Gala's spotlight, but the slow, undeniable force of preparation and foresight. The past humiliation was no longer a wound, but a tool, sharpened into clarity. She understood now that real influence was unseen until revealed, subtle until undeniable. The world had not yet noticed her ascent, but when it did, it would be complete, and it would be impossible to ignore. She attended a private luncheon, her presence deliberate, controlled, commanding without a word. The room buzzed with quiet recognition, some curious, some wary. Each handshake, each brief conversation was a carefully measured maneuver, a small pivot in a game most didn't even realize she had begun. He at 35 was already circulating, smiling, performing the role of the unaffected socialite. Yet every glance his way hinted at unease. Her name lingered on lips and in thoughts, like a faint melody that refused to fade. The first domino had been nudged, and the momentum now belonged to her. Meetings became arenas of observation. She took notes silently, her mind threading connections between donors, board members, and social allies. He at 35 continued his usual charm offensive, unaware that she was mapping influence, detecting weaknesses in the alliances he assumed were unbreakable. The subtle undercurrent of tension grew, almost imperceptible, like a tremor before an earthquake. Each email sent, each invitation declined, each discreet endorsement she offered was another stitch in the net tightening around her target. She attended a preview gala, a week before the next major charity event. She wore a sapphire gown that caught the light with every step. Her presence commanded attention, not through arrogance, but through subtle elegance. Conversations bent toward her, curiosity sparking where once there had been indifference. He at 35 noticed, registering her influence with quiet unease, forcing a tighter smile. The room, a microcosm of power and performance, was already bending to her strategy, drawn not by spectacle, but by the inevitability of recognition she exuded. The city's social circles buzzed quietly, reputations shifting like shadows. She had cultivated allies in key positions, her name now carrying weight beyond the ballroom. He at 35 heard fragments, secondhand whispers of admiration and subtle awe, none of which he could control. His carefully curated facade showed cracks only to those willing to notice. Each unnoticed nod to her competence, each acknowledgement of her foresight, was a quiet victory in the storm she was assembling. By acting with patience, she had made influence feel inevitable. And he, for the first time, was forced to respond rather than dictate. The night before the next major gala, she reviewed every detail: seating charts, invitations, donor lists. Her preparation was meticulous, the calm before the storm infused with certainty. Outside, the city breathed in the rhythm of anticipation. Unaware of the subtle shifts in power taking place within its walls, he, despite his charisma, could not predict the depth of planning that now dictated the coming night. Her quiet gathering of influence, invisible yet formidable, promised a reckoning that would feel seamless, almost natural, to those who would witness it. The invitations had been sent weeks prior, but tonight, the acceptance messages arrived like tiny victories. She read each confirmation with quiet satisfaction, noting who would sit where, who would notice her influence first. He at 35 was performing as always, confident, charming, unaware that the room was already tilting toward her favor. Each RSVP, each expressed admiration, each subtle acknowledgement of her reputation strengthened her position. The gala would not just be a stage. It would be a canvas on which she could paint her success, elegantly, irreversibly. Small interactions during the week foreshadowed the night ahead. She moved among socialites with grace, each word chosen, each gesture measured. Allies whispered their support discreetly. Donors acknowledged her insight, and those who had doubted her began to take notice. He at 35 felt it, though he could not identify it. The tide had shifted subtly, imperceptibly, but undeniably. Confidence had a new source, and it emanated from her quiet mastery of observation, preparation, and influence. A midweek board meeting offered another subtle triumph. She presented her proposals with clarity, conviction, and unassuming authority. The committee, mostly mid-30s to early 50s, responded with respect, their nods and murmurs indicating agreement. He at 35 attempted to interject charm and dominance, but the room now instinctively followed her lead. Each point she made reinforced the inevitability of her rising influence. The gala's night was approaching, but the balance of power had already begun to tip. By the week's end, whispers of admiration and intrigue circulated through social networks and private circles. She watched from the edges of small gatherings as others discussed her insight, her composure, and her recent successes. He at 35 tried to maintain a veneer of dominance, but every smile and nod in her direction reminded him of his misstep at the gala. The storm she had cultivated was now becoming visible. A gentle turning of the tide, carrying influence where once there had been only performance. The night before the gala, she walked the quiet streets once more, her mind steady, her plan secure. She felt the momentum in the air, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. The city's lights reflected her resolve, and each shadow seemed to echo the inevitability of the coming night. He, despite his meticulous charm, would soon face the subtle but decisive culmination of her strategy. Calm, prepared, and confident, she embraced the anticipation, knowing that the turning light of her influence would shine fully on the evening to come. The night of the gala arrived like a storm wrapped in silk and gold. She entered poised and radiant, her presence immediately commanding attention. Every detail had been orchestrated: seating arrangements, invitations, the placement of key allies, each element a note in the symphony of revelation. He at 35 moved through the room as usual, confident, charming, unaware that the currents had shifted completely. Whispers of admiration followed her as she passed, the air thick with anticipation. She alone seemed to understand. Tonight, every eye would see the truth, and no performance could mask it. Every conversation she engaged in became a demonstration of influence. Her words were measured, her laughter soft, yet every gesture left an impression of competence and authority. Donors nodded, board members leaned in, and allies reinforced her reputation quietly. He at 35 attempted his usual charm, but subtle signs of doubt crept into his posture and tone. The room was hers, not through spectacle, but through undeniable presence and strategic grace. The moment arrived when the gala's highlight was announced. The top donors would be revealed on a golden-lit screen. The crowd hushed. He at 35 felt a flicker of panic, assuming his name would dominate the accolades. Then the display illuminated her contributions, her name, her signature, each donation larger than he had expected. Applause erupted, growing into thunderous recognition. Her victory was quiet, dignified, and undeniable, leaving Ethan exposed not through scandal, but through her competence and generosity. She did not speak. She did not celebrate loudly. Her triumph existed in the reactions around her, in the subtle nods, in the impressed murmurs. She had learned that power revealed itself through the acknowledgement of others, not self-proclamation. He, despite his efforts to charm or deflect, could only watch as the truth unfolded. The narrative of the night, rewritten by her foresight, patience, and grace. The ballroom had transformed into a stage for justice that was elegant, controlled, and utterly final. As the gala wound down, she moved through the crowd with calm certainty, the night now fully hers. She had turned humiliation into influence, ridicule into respect. Conversations flowed around her, subtle glances carried acknowledgement, and the city's social pulse had shifted beneath her feet. He at 35 left with forced smiles, the weight of the night pressing down, his dominance quietly eroded. The revelation was complete. Her power, silent and methodical, had triumphed over arrogance and performance. The night ended not in spectacle, but in quiet, undeniable victory. The city morning was calm, painted in soft gold and quiet promise. She sipped tea by the window, the gala now a memory rather than a source of tension. The applause, the recognition, the subtle shifts of influence, all were moments she carried in her mind like delicate threads woven into her own story. He at 35 had retreated into reflection of his own, forced to confront the fragility of appearance and unchecked pride. She did not gloat. Triumph, she had learned, tasted sweetest when savored quietly, with dignity intact, and a heart unburdened by vindictiveness. She spent the morning drafting thank you letters, acknowledging generosity with warmth and sincerity. Each word reflected the careful balance of humility and recognition she had mastered. Recipients responded with admiration, reinforcing bonds she had cultivated not through power plays, but through authenticity. Meanwhile, he, at 35, felt the absence of influence he had once assumed as natural. Her reach had expanded quietly, yet irreversibly, leaving a mark that could not be erased by charm or arrogance. Later, she walked the city streets, the bustle around her a distant hum. Her steps were measured, her mind quiet, yet alive with possibility. Reflections in store windows mirrored her calm confidence, a subtle reminder of how far she had come since the gala. He at 35 moved in his own orbit, aware of her rising influence but unable to reclaim the certainty he once held. The city itself seemed to bow slightly to her resilience, not in spectacle, but in recognition of the quiet power she had always carried. At twilight, she returned to her apartment, gazing over the cityscape from her balcony. She felt the harmony of resolution. No need for celebration, no need for revenge. The gala, the rivalries, the social games, all had shaped her, and now she could move forward unburdened. He at 35 had learned the lessons of hubris quietly and privately, his presence absent from her reflection. Victory, she realized, was measured not in spectacle, but in the serenity of one's own conscience, a truth the city itself seemed to acknowledge in the fading light. As night fell completely, the city lights twinkled like a constellation of possibilities. She understood that her story was no longer about humiliation, rivalry, or recognition. It was about influence exercised with integrity, resilience, and grace. The signature she had left at the gala, the quiet victories, the respect earned, all were markers of a new equilibrium. He had faded from the spotlight of her life, not through confrontation, but through the inevitability of her composed ascent. She turned from the window, the city behind her, fully aware that quiet triumph once claimed was eternal.